Hi, and welcome to 10 Kids, 2 Docs, Parenting Insights from Pediatrician Moms. I'm Dr. Sylvia Bank.
And I'm Dr. Vivian Carlin. Welcome back. So today I want to turn our attention to something a little bit more serious, and I'd like to focus today on drowning prevention.
This is a much needed topic, and as we approach the summer months, I think it's the perfect time to talk about drowning and pool safety.
Welcome to the 10 Kids, 2 Docs podcast. Seasoned pediatricians and longtime friends, Sylvia Bank and Vivian Carlin have counseled thousands of parents and are raising 4 and 6 kids, respectively. Join these doctor moms as they incorporate fun and their combined wisdom and experience to share parenting insights for anyone looking for practical and trustworthy guidance. Please note that this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment from your doctor.
Okay, before we begin, please be advised that this episode contains discussion and depiction of drowning, which some listeners may find disturbing or upsetting.
Okay, so Sylvia, before we start talking about this topic, I'd kind of like to paint a picture for the listeners of why this is so important to you and me and why we are so hyper vigilant about drowning. And I think almost everyone who trains in pediatrics at some point takes care of a patient who either dies from drowning or has a near drowning event with neurologic sequela. And I'm curious if you have experiences like that from your training or from your career.
Yeah, absolutely. Drowning and near drowning episodes is something that I think every pediatrician who is trained in an ER or ICU setting has experience with, unfortunately. And I do agree. That's why we as both moms and pediatricians are very hypervigilant when it comes to pool safety and drowning. Mm-hmm. I remember when I started working my job in the ER as an attending 8-year-old who had a drowning episode in a nearby pool in the community that I live in and the pool that we belong to. And it was very notable because, this could have been my child, right? This is in our community, in our pool. Yeah. And that child died in the ER from a drowning episode, and a previously healthy child just one afternoon playing in a pool. And that stays with you, as a pediatrician, right?
Oh, Sylvia, that's so sad. And I spent a large part of my career doing pediatric emergency medicine. And I don't know if the listeners realize, but anytime there's a death in the pediatric ER, it's like a cloud over the entire ER. Children are not expected to die. It is always, always tragic. So I can only imagine how unsettling and just incredibly sad that was.
And then I remember the parents, like the parents coming in afterwards, previously healthy child, just kind of trying to grasp what is going on here and what's happening to my child. It was just watching the parents' grief is overwhelming, right?
Yeah, so sad. I have a similar experience. I took care of a patient who was in very long-term rehabilitation after a near drowning event. So had, full respiratory and cardiac arrest, but did survive. However, did have neurologic consequences of that event. And this particular patient, the mother was a physician. I met her in this encounter, but similar in age, similar age of our children. There was just such a sense of this could have been me. And I think that is a reality that you and I as pediatricians know that I really want to impress on everybody. It does not matter how vigilant you think you are, how smart you think you are. We're all at risk. That reality is something that you and I have had to wrestle with in how we parent our children and how we enforce pool safety.
Yeah, I think we as trained pediatricians, our first experience with pool and pool safety was in this context of tragedy. And then we became parents bringing our children to the pool, right? So, the amount of hypervigilance that we have as parents can be thought of as amplified based on our experiences, right?
Yeah. So I would like to share my screen because drowning is a very, very big topic. When we look at drowning, There's different spikes that occur at different ages. So we know that under 1, before children are mobile, the most common place that a drowning occurs is in the bathtub. And that's why children under 1 in a bathtub need to be watched at all times. They cannot be left alone. When we get to 1 to 4, that switches to a swimming pool. We now have children that are fully mobile. They are able to climb, and yet they are not competent swimmers. And then we see another spike in adolescence, which is in open water. And that is often related to risk-taking behavior and et cetera. So in order for us to do justice to any of these drowning events, I want to narrow our focus. And today, as we're going into summer, I want to talk about pools. The majority of drowning cases by far occur in this 1 to 4 age group, and they occur in swimming pools. So we're going to narrow our focus to swimming pools. Hopefully we can get to these other risk categories at some other episode. And I want to narrow it even further because there's 2 situations in which drownings occur in swimming pools. The first is during swim time, right? When people are at the pool swimming with their children. The second is when it is not swim time and a child or a toddler wanders into a pool where no one is supposed to be swimming. So I want to divide out those 2 categories. And I think for our first episode, I'd like to focus on pool safety during swim time.
Do you have any stories to share about your experience with pool safety?
Oh, okay. I do have a very vivid, memorable experience of this whole concept of safety during swim time. And this situation that I was in, I was at a friend's house that lived out of town, and there were a few families gathering together. And between us, I think we had maybe 12 children, and a bulk of them were in this high risk range, ages, 1 to 5 or so. And we were all sitting at their backyard pool, and I was sitting on the edge. And I remember looking over to the deep end, and something caught my eye, and I realized it looked like a child was floating in the water. And right at the same time as this caught my attention, and I was getting up from my seat to go see what was going on, a parent that was in the pool saw this child and started yelling the child's name and pulled the child out of the water. And when the child was pulled out of the water, I think the moment that is most memorable to everyone who was there is that this child was just limp. And I don't want to say blue, but just ashen gray limp. Terrifying, totally terrifying. So he pulls the child out of the pool. I run over. I'm yelling out to the people that are sitting there, somebody call 911. And I get over there and instinctively give the child rescue breaths. And as I have it like on the tip of my tongue, I'm about to yell out, does anybody else know CPR? Because I'm now going to switch to doing chest compressions. And I'd really like to do 2-person CPR if there's somebody else trained. As this is on the tip of my tongue, the child starts coughing and starts crying.
Oh my goodness.
He regains consciousness. Of course, his color comes back. He starts sitting up and coughing and gagging, and then eventually starts talking to us. And I mean, thankfully this child was completely fine. But that moment and how close it could have been to this being a much more tragic outcome was absolutely terrifying to everybody that was there.
Oh my goodness. Vivian, you saved this child's life.
Well, I like to think that if I hadn't been there, somebody else would have stepped in and done breaths, but it is a little too close for comfort, for sure. Very, very scary.
What a powerful story. I can't imagine kind of going through that with, this is to a child that you knew, right? You knew this child's parents. That's very powerful.
Yeah. It was very, very unsettling. And, something else we know about drowning and near drowning is, if you can imagine, when a child, let's say, falls into a pool, it starts a clock ticking, right? Where they have a certain amount of air in their lungs. And at some point that oxygen drops off, their carbon dioxide builds up in their lungs. There's a natural reflex occurs when the carbon dioxide buildup in the lungs becomes too much that the child inhales, right? They take in water. At the same time, there's a natural curve that occurs where the hypoxia, the lack of oxygen, becomes enough that the child goes into cardiac arrest, right? And we know this can happen so fast.
Right.
Somewhere between 30 seconds to 2 minutes. I mean, that is how fast we're talking. So in this scenario where I'm talking about, although the event was terrifying, and I even questioned, what did we do wrong to even let this happen? the steps afterward were absolutely effective and life-saving. And I think in retrospect, this child never went into cardiac arrest. We caught him that early. We're talking
Right.
30 seconds to a minute. There was somebody in the pool. There were people looking at the pool. But when those steps all happen that fast, the outcome can be very different, right?
Right. Now that we've kind of outlined the scope and the need for safety measures related to drowning, near drowning, and pool safety, in the second half, we're going to review guidelines and give our practical tips and hacks as parents going to the pool with our children.
Sounds good.
There are several layers of protection that the AAP recommends for parents.
Yeah, so one of the resources I like that really dovetails nicely is the National Drowning Prevention Alliance, NDPA. You can find their website. They have a brochure, and it's called The 5 Layers of Protection for Pool Safety. Okay, the first one is barriers and alarms. We're going to get to that in another episode, and that is all geared towards pool safety when it is not swim time. Mm-hmm. The next 4 are all related to pool safety when it is swim time, right? Supervision, water competency, life jackets, emergency preparation. For supervision, I do love the idea of designating a water watcher.
Right. Specifically an adult who will pay constant attention to children in the water. And this adult is literally only doing that. They put down their cell phone, they avoid other activities and conversation, they supervise even if there's a lifeguard present, and they're not under the influence of drugs or alcohol at the time that they're the water watcher.
The NDPA actually even has bands that you can order as a resource for parents where you're just passing this armband around so that people know, like, my job right now is to watch the water. And I can think of times in my parenting where, I had friends who had children very much the same ages as mine. I had friends who had a lot of children like I did. And I can picture times where we were at a pool and there were lots of children in that 1 to 5 age range, right? But I love the idea of just this so intentional, purposeful, designating a water watcher and passing around this wristband for certain shifts. Because even as adults, this was kind of goes back to my story about the fellow physician that I met. I think that I'm pretty good about staying on task and watching the pool, but I can certainly imagine that perfect storm where I get distracted and a couple of minutes go by and I wasn't watching the pool. Yeah. So the other recommendation for supervision is touch distance. And the way I think about that is more if I'm swimming with my child one-on-one who is in that 1 to 4 age range, learning how to swim, experimenting with learning how to swim. I want them out of a floaty as much as possible so they're getting used to that. But then I am absolutely touch distance, right? They're just not competent to be far away from me. My attention needs to be fully on them.
Right. Like you can reach down, if they splutter too long, you can just pull them right up out of the water, right? That's touch distance.
Yes. So number 3 here is water competency.
Right. Swim lessons for toddlers are the first step towards water safety. By age 4, most children can usually learn basic water survival skills, such as floating, treading water, getting to an exit point. And by 5 or 6, most children can start mastering that freestyle front crawl stroke.
So why don't you tell me what was your method for teaching your children to swim? What was your philosophy?
Sure. So swimming and teaching our children to swim was a big priority in my parenting. I want to say 3 years old, where we started our very first one-on-one swim lesson offered by our community association. And it was just basically a teenage swim instructor who was very enthusiastic, peppy, and fun, who did this, standard way of teaching toddlers how to swim that started with blowing bubbles, putting your head under the water, just basic holding your breath when going under. And we did that for each of our children, the summer that they were around 3 or 4 years of age. And then following that, we actually moved towards kind of just my husband and I doing swim, where we would go to the swimming pool almost once a week. My husband would be in the pool kind of using those skills and getting our kids to start swimming, whether or not it was a little doggy paddle, whether or not it's big arms, but some sort of way of swimming across the pool. And after they got across the pool, any way, shape, or form, it wasn't very pretty. It wasn't like an official stroke. We
Sure.
actually enrolled them into our summer swim team where, in order to make the swim team, you could be any age, but you had to get across the pool.
Yes, yes.
125-yard pool,
Yeah.
any way, shape, or form. And then you were on the team. And then all summer long, the swim team taught them more and more confidence in the water. What did you guys do?
Yeah, I would say like you, this was a really high priority. In fact, when I think about my parenting as a whole, I feel like there are these major milestones that I have. Number one, getting your child to feed themselves. If I put food on your plate and you feed yourself, I don't have to do it. Teaching your child to read, so huge. But I would rank right up there, teaching your child to swim. Oh my gosh, it's such a relief when I know that they're competent swimmers, but it took a long time and a lot of work with all these children to get there. We have great group swim lessons pretty close to our house that we started them all out in. And then like you, once they got to that point that they could, and if it wasn't pretty, that they could go across the pool, we would send all of them to our like local just summer swim team, which was, enthusiastic college students. And it was definitely the most bang for our buck as far as cost. And then you're getting a swim lesson every day. So that's where they really developed a lot of competency. I did have one that was a little more tricky. And for him, he really needed to be in a class that was teaching him to go under and then roll onto his back. And this particular child who really needed to swim using that technique of rolling on his back, we would do those swim tests where, to be at this pool or whatever, without a life jacket, you have to swim the 25 yards. And I would always tell the teenage lifeguard, he's going to look like he's drowning. Trust me. He's not. I'm right here. I'm going to watch him the whole way. Trust me. He's going to get across this pool. And he did. And he doesn't do that anymore. He can swim much better now. But it was a little dicey for a while.
Yeah, like a different learning curve, right?
That was very much our method. Huge priority. We need to be in the pool during the summer because it's hot. We're at the pool all the time. And there was such a sigh of relief when everybody could swim.
Yeah. So I just want to acknowledge that there are a lot of people in the United States who live in urban areas that don't have access to pools. And I just want to mention that there's resources for them too. I was in New York City with one of my kids, and we were at this mall, within New York City walking around. And in this mall, there was a goldfish swim school.
Yes.
Like in the mall.
Yes, I remember there was a strip mall near my mom's house that had like a 5 and dime store or something. And like a decade later, it became a swim school. Yeah. I'm thinking, how did somebody architect that? Like, how do you turn that store that I've walked in into a pool?
I think it's genius because it gives people who don't have, ready access to pools, the ability to teach their kids water competency and swimming.
Right, exactly. So, again, in this concept of how to keep our children safe when we are at the pool during pool time, we talked about supervision with touch distance and the water watcher. We talked about water competency and the importance of swim lessons. Let's talk about life jackets.
Yeah. The AAP recommends to put a child in a properly fitted U.S. Coast Guard approved life jacket when around or near water. Do you have experience using life jackets in pools?
I think life jackets had an important role in my parenting and pool safety. And let me explain. So we know life jackets do not help with water competency. I mean, they actually can create like a false sense of protection. I did have one of my children who was 4. I had him in his life jacket because there were so many kids around and I didn't feel like he was that competent yet. And I remember he told me a story of how that we got out of the pool, he had lunch. We were all sitting there having lunch. And then he just instinctively ran over and jumped in the pool, but he had his life jacket off, right? He had forgotten his life jacket on. Thankfully, he could swim good enough. He got to the edge, but it shook him up because he was expecting the life jacket and he just went under and he wasn't expecting that. In his description, it was a really good description of that false sense of security with the life jacket.
Yeah.
But where I found life jackets really helpful. I mean, at one point, I had 6 children, 9 and under. So I probably had 3 in that high risk age range at once. And if I could work with them one-on-one in the pool, touch distance, no life jacket, like let's do that. But there were so many times where I really needed to be more water watcher and I'm keeping my eye on all of my children. And if I'm one-on-one with somebody, I'm distracted and I'm not paying attention to everyone. And in that scenario, putting a child who is that, 3, 4, learning to swim, but not fully competent in a life jacket allows them to stay in my line of sight, right?
Right.
Have that freedom that they want to jump off the edge again and again and again and to swim around with their siblings. And I can be watching them the whole time because they are above the water. The other scenario I feel like a life jacket was helpful to me in was kind of what I described with my 4-year-old. Until my children could stand in the shallow end, if we were in a scenario where there were a lot of kids, like a party or like a summer camp, I would put them in a life jacket, because it's one thing to be able to swim 25 yards uninhibited or 25 meters uninhibited across a pool. It's another thing to be roughhousing with like 15 5-year-olds and stay above water, right? So that was another scenario where I would use the life jacket is you can swim pretty well, but not when you're roughhousing like this and you're not always over to the edge.
No, that sounds like a perfect use for that.
Okay, so Sylvia, again, when we talk about these layers of protection, the ones we're talking about today, last one is emergency preparation. And I hit on that with the story that I told, but you activate 911 fast. You ideally, if somebody is there and can perform CPR, we know that in all scenarios, bystander CPR absolutely, absolutely saves lives.
Yeah. The AAP recommends parents get CPR certified. Sometimes seconds, can make a big difference. And if parents are available and know how to perform basic first CPR, then that could be life-changing and outcome-changing as well.
As I'm perusing the NDPA brochure on emergency preparation, one of the points that they make, I've heard the AAP make this point too, I think it's a very good one, is that if a child goes missing, you always, always check the pool.
Right.
You always check the pool first.
Right. I mean, I want to reiterate again that you and I used pools during the summer as a way to have fun, to keep our kids active, to teach them new skills. And pool time can be super fun, right, for a family.
Yeah. Love pool time.
Yeah. And I don't want to discourage people from, going to the pool and enjoying the pool, but I want people to understand that this is, recommendations on how to be safe while doing that, right?
Yeah. I hope that this gives our listeners something to think about. It gives them that feeling of needing to be vigilant, that this, unfortunately, I don't even think we've said this yet, but in this 1 to 4 age range, the leading cause of death is drowning. So super important that we're talking about this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I think for summary, it's really what we've said again and again on this episode. There's layers of protection for pool safety, adult supervision, water competency and swim lessons, life jackets, and then emergency preparation.
This has been a great discussion just to kind of, as we approach the summer, frame of mind that parents should be thinking in creating a safe environment related to pool and pool safety.
Yeah, this is 10 Kids, 2 Docs. I'm Dr. Vivian Carlin.
And I'm Dr. Sylvia Bank. See you next time.
Thank you for listening to 10 Kids, 2 Docs, hosted and created by Sylvia Bank and Vivian Carlin. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and recommend our podcast to other listeners. Visit our website at 10kids2docs.com, where you can find links to social media and leave comments or suggestions. Back next week with more topics in parenting.